A black waitress said to the billionaire CEO, "Sir, my mom has a tattoo just like yours." Silence. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. It was a night like any other in the city of New York, with its bright lights and hustle that never seemed to stop. The streets were alive, and the elite, as usual, gathered in the best restaurants to discuss business, wealth, and power. At one of the most exclusive venues in Manhattan, a lavish dinner was underway, attended by some of the city's most influential figures. Among them was Jason Fields, a self-made billionaire who had built his tech empire from the ground up. Jason was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. He was tall, well-dressed in a bespoke suit, and his confidence was palpable. He had mastered the art of making people feel small without saying a word. His cold gaze swept across the room, assessing everyone, but never truly seeing them. To him, they were just pieces on a chessboard, meant to serve his purpose. And then there was her, Angela Johnson, the waitress, who had been working at the restaurant for 3 years. Angela was just another face in the crowd, another member of the service staff that people barely noticed. She moved between the tables, refilling drinks and delivering plates with practiced efficiency. But Angela was more than what they saw. Beneath the polished exterior was a woman who had lived through struggles most of the people in that room could never imagine. Angela had always been invisible to the wealthy and powerful. It was a part of her life that she had come to accept. She had learned to smile through the constant microaggressions and patronizing looks, never showing any sign of discomfort. But that night, things were different. Jason Fields, sitting at the head of the table, took a sip of his expensive bourbon and then looked over at Angela with a smirk. He could tell she was nervous, but he didn't care. To him, she was just a part of the background. He waved his hand dismissively. "Can you get me another drink, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Angela, who had been through far worse, kept her composure. She was used to being treated this way. But something about Jason's tone, the way he said sweetheart, like he was talking to a child, stirred something inside of her. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she kept her eyes on the floor and refilled his glass without a word. Jason smirked again, clearly enjoying the power he had over her. But what he didn't know was that Angela had heard something earlier that made her see him differently. As she walked past the table earlier in the evening, she had overheard Jason talking to his colleagues about his tattoo, a large, intricate design on his left arm. He had proudly mentioned how it was a symbol of his success, a reminder of where he came from. Angela couldn't help but be struck by the irony of it all. She had seen that tattoo before, not on him, but on her mother's arm. Her mother, a woman who had faced much of the same struggles that Angela had, wore the same tattoo, a symbol of resilience and strength that had been passed down through their family. Angela had never told anyone about it, but tonight, standing before Jason, she couldn't hold back any longer. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable sense of purpose, "my mom has a tattoo just like yours." Jason's smirk faltered for a split second. He looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. He hadn't expected this. No one had ever dared speak to him like that before, especially not someone like Angela. The room fell into a hushed silence. All eyes turned to her, waiting for Jason's reaction. Angela stood there, her hands steady, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't care anymore about the sneers or the judgment. This was her moment, and she was going to take it. The room remained silent, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though time had stopped. Jason Fields, the billionaire CEO, was no longer the confident, untouchable man he had been just moments ago. He was now facing a reality he had never expected. A young waitress, someone he had barely acknowledged, had just dropped a bombshell on him. The smug look on his face began to falter as he stared at Angela, who stood tall, her gaze unwavering. Her words hung in the air, the weight of them shifting the power dynamic in the room. The table of executives, who had been listening to Jason's every word with rapt attention, now shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Angela and Jason. Jason's usual quick wit, which had always served him well in business, seemed to desert him. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Angela, however, was calm, as if this moment had been coming all along. She had known that the power was never really in Jason's hands. It had always been with people like her, the ones who worked in the shadows, who were looked down upon but never truly understood. The truth was that Angela had been invisible to people like Jason for years. She had spent her life working in the service industry, moving between tables, refilling drinks, and smiling through the constant stream of disrespect and condescension. But today it was different. Today, she wasn't just a waitress. She was a woman with a story, with strength, and most importantly, with knowledge that Jason could never have anticipated. As the silence stretched on, Angela's voice broke through once more, but this time it was softer, more deliberate. "You don't know me, Mr. Fields. But my mother, she taught me more than just how to work. She taught me the power of history, the power of resilience. That tattoo you have, it's not just ink. It's a symbol of your journey. But it's also a reminder of how you've overlooked people like me." Jason's face tightened, a flash of embarrassment crossing his features. He had never considered that the people he saw as beneath him might have lives, stories, and histories just as complex as his own. His eyes flicked nervously toward the table, where the other guests now sat in stunned silence. The tension was palpable, and Jason knew that the game had changed. For the first time, he realized that Angela wasn't just talking about a tattoo. She was talking about something much deeper. Angela continued, her voice steady. "You think because you wear a suit and sit at the head of a table, you hold all the power. But power doesn't come from money or status. It comes from understanding people, from seeing them for who they truly are, not just as tools to further your agenda." Jason shifted in his seat, his hands suddenly clammy. He had never been challenged like this before, especially not in front of others. He tried to regain his composure, but Angela's words had struck a nerve. "I've spent my life working, just like my mother. But unlike you, we don't get to rest on our laurels or buy our way to the top. We have to fight for every little bit of respect we get," she said, her eyes meeting his. "And that tattoo, the one you wear as a badge of honor, is the same one my mother wears. She wore it through years of struggle, of being looked down upon by people like you. But that tattoo means something more now. It's a reminder of who we are, who we've always been." Jason sat back, unable to find his words. The smugness that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, humility. The silence in the room grew heavier as the weight of Angela's words sank in. For the first time, he felt small. Angela turned to walk away, her back straight, her movements deliberate. But as she reached the door, she paused. "I hope one day you'll understand that the people you think you can dismiss are the ones who will always hold the most power. Because we don't need to prove anything to you. We just need you to see us." With that, she left the room, leaving behind a stunned silence that no one could fill. The guests at the table remained motionless, unsure of how to react. Jason, still processing everything that had just transpired, sat quietly, his thoughts swirling. This wasn't just a moment of humiliation. It was a turning point. And as the room slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. He had underestimated Angela, and in doing so, had underestimated the power of the people he had so carelessly dismissed. The real question was whether he would learn from this moment or continue down the same path. As for Angela, she had made her point, and in doing so, had reclaimed a power she had never truly lost. The room was still. The tension from Angela's words had settled like a heavy fog, lingering in the air. Jason Fields, the man who had spent his entire life building an empire, now sat in stunned silence, his mind spinning. He had been caught off guard by Angela in a way that he could never have imagined. The smug confidence that usually accompanied his presence had been shattered in an instant. As he sat there, staring at the empty chair where Angela had been just moments ago, something inside him shifted. He could feel it. The realization that he had underestimated her, and not just her, but the countless people like her, people who had been invisible in his world for far too long. His gaze flickered toward the other guests, who were still processing what had just happened. No one spoke at first, and for a long moment, the only sound was the quiet clinking of silverware and the faint hum of the restaurant's air conditioning. Finally, One of the executives at the table cleared his throat. "Jason," he said, his voice tentative, "that was unexpected." Jason didn't respond immediately. His thoughts were elsewhere, replaying Angela's words over and over again. He had heard them, but it was as if they were sinking in now, a slow realization of just how wrong he had been. Not just about Angela, but about the way he had treated people in general. He had always believed that power was something to be wielded, something to be used to get what he wanted. But Angela's quiet defiance had turned that belief upside down. "Maybe we need to rethink our approach," another executive added, his voice softer than usual. Jason looked up, meeting the man's eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice more thoughtful than it had been in a long time. "I mean," the executive continued, "that maybe we've been so focused on our own power and success that we've forgotten what really matters. Maybe Angela's right. It's not about the power you hold over others, but the power to see and understand them." Jason's jaw tightened. He knew what the man was saying was true, but admitting it out loud felt like an admission of failure. He had built his life on the idea that power was everything, that success was defined by wealth, status, and the ability to control those around him. But now, in the wake of Angela's words, he felt a deep sense of unease. He looked across the table at the others, seeing their faces, a mixture of discomfort and contemplation. They, too, were beginning to understand the weight of what had just transpired. The silence that had settled over the room was no longer uncomfortable. It was a moment of reflection. Jason took a deep breath and pushed his chair back. "I need to go," he said quietly, standing up. The others looked at him, their expressions mixed. "Jason, are you okay?" one of them asked, concern creeping into his voice. Jason didn't respond immediately. He just walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. He needed time to think, to process what had just happened. The door to the restaurant opened, and Jason stepped into the cool night air. The city of New York was still alive with activity, but everything felt different now. As he walked down the sidewalk, he thought about Angela, her words, and the tattoo. It wasn't just a symbol of strength, as he had thought. It was a reminder that people like Angela, the ones he had overlooked and dismissed, had their own stories, their own struggles, and their own strength. He had spent so much of his life chasing success, but in that moment, he realized that he had missed something far more important. The next day, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had changed. He found himself thinking about Angela, her quiet strength, and her ability to stand up for herself in a way he never could. He thought about the way she had spoken so calmly, so confidently, without fear. It was something he had never learned to do. Jason sat in his office, staring out at the skyline of the city he had built. He had always seen it as a symbol of his success, his dominance. But now, it seemed distant, almost irrelevant. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he had not expected to call. "Angela," he said when she answered, his voice unsure. "It's Jason Fields. I wanted to apologize. I've been thinking about what you said, and I realized that I've been blind to a lot of things. I treated you, and people like you, as if you were beneath me. And I was wrong. I want to make it right." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Angela spoke, her voice calm, but with a hint of warmth. "I appreciate that, Mr. Fields. But this isn't about me. It's about understanding the people who've been overlooked and giving them a voice. If you're serious about changing, then start by listening to them." Jason nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He had a lot to learn, and he knew it. But for the first time, he felt like he was ready to listen. The days that followed were filled with a kind of quiet anticipation. Jason Fields, the once untouchable billionaire CEO, had spent the last few days in a state of constant reflection. Angela's words had not left him, echoing in his mind at every turn. He found himself questioning everything he had built, everything he thought he knew about success, power, and the people he had treated as invisible. It was a humbling experience, one that made him look at his empire through new eyes. But as much as Jason wanted to ignore the nagging guilt, he couldn't. It was clear that something had shifted inside him. The power he had once held with such certainty now seemed insignificant in comparison to the humility he was beginning to feel. He wanted to do more than just apologize. He wanted to make real change. And so, he called Angela. The call had been brief, but it had sparked something inside him. Angela, though polite, had made it clear that words were not enough. "You want to make it right?" she had asked him. "Then start by listening." Start by understanding that power isn't about domination. It's about empowerment. Jason had heard her loud and clear. He knew now that his next steps needed to be different. He needed to act, not just talk. The first step was finding a way to truly make a difference for people like Angela, the ones who had been overlooked for so long. So, Jason reached out to his network, leveraging his position as a billionaire to create opportunities for those who had been denied them because of their race, their background, or their profession. He set up mentorship programs, scholarships, and funding for people who, like Angela, had been dismissed by society's elite. His company, once a symbol of corporate greed, began to shift its focus. But Jason wasn't just doing this for the sake of good PR. He was doing it because he truly believed in the power of change. He was beginning to understand that success wasn't measured in the number of zeros on a paycheck, but in the impact you had on the lives of others. Meanwhile, Angela, though cautious, began to see a shift in the way people treated her. She had been offered opportunities she never imagined, scholarships for her education, a leadership role in a new project within her community, and even a chance to work with Jason directly. It wasn't about the money or the recognition, though. It was about respect. The kind of respect that comes when people see you for who you really are, not for what they expect you to be. As much as Jason's gesture meant, it was Angela's strength that had truly caused the transformation. She had shown him that people like her weren't invisible. They just needed someone to open their eyes to the fact that they held power, too. One afternoon, Angela found herself standing in front of a group of young women in a conference room at Jason's company. They were all from different walks of life. Some were single mothers, others had faced hardship, but all of them had the same fire in their eyes that Angela had seen in herself years ago. "You all have the power to create change," Angela said, standing at the front of the room. "Don't let anyone ever tell you that you don't." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Your voice matters. Your story matters. And most importantly, you matter." Jason, who was sitting in the back of the room, watched as Angela spoke. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of pride, not in his wealth or his company, but in the woman standing before him. He had made mistakes. He had ignored the very people who made his success possible. But now, thanks to Angela, he was learning what true success really meant. And as the women in the room clapped, Angela gave Jason a small nod, her expression softening. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. She had never asked for anything. She had only wanted to be seen. And in that moment, she was seen, not as a waitress, but as a force of change. Jason knew that he couldn't undo the past. But he also knew that, with Angela's help, he could shape a better future. And that, he realized, was what true power was all about. As weeks passed, Jason Fields began to feel the weight of his new responsibilities. His company, which had once been driven solely by profit and dominance, now took on a new direction. Every decision he made, every policy he implemented, was influenced by a growing understanding of what it meant to empower others. He was no longer the man who simply made moves to increase his wealth or expand his empire. Now, he was driven by a deeper purpose, making sure the people who had been invisible in his world for so long had the opportunity to be seen, heard, and respected. But despite his efforts to change, Jason knew that actions spoke louder than words. And even though the mentorship programs and scholarships he had introduced were a start, they were only a small part of what needed to be done. It was clear that the true work lay in breaking down the systems that had allowed inequality to persist for so long. Angela, ever the realist, had watched Jason's transformation with a mix of caution and hope. She had been skeptical at first. It was easy to say the right things, to offer opportunities, but the real question was whether Jason would stay committed to the cause when the going got tough. She had seen too many people like him, people who talked a big game but never followed through. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Angela saw something in Jason that made her believe he was truly trying to make amends. He wasn't just offering token gestures. He was listening, learning, and most importantly, changing his actions. One afternoon, Jason invited Angela to his office. It was the first time he had asked to meet her outside of the public eye, and Angela wasn't sure what to expect. When she walked into his sleek, modern office, she found him sitting at the desk, surrounded by paperwork, his sleeves rolled up as if he had been working nonstop. It wasn't the usual polished CEO she had come to expect, but a man who seemed genuinely tired, like the weight of the world had suddenly been placed on his shoulders. "Angela," he began, standing up to greet her. "I need to talk to you about something." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I've realized that what I've done so far isn't enough," Jason admitted. "I've been focusing on the wrong things. I've been talking about change, but I haven't really taken the steps to make it happen. And I know you're right. It's not about making people feel good with empty gestures. It's about real, systemic change." Angela felt a flicker of respect for him. He wasn't just admitting his mistakes, he was taking responsibility. It was a rare thing in people like him. "What are you planning to do?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. Jason leaned against the desk, clearly deep in thought. "I'm planning to invest in the communities we've overlooked for years. I want to help people who've been kept out of opportunities, not just by offering charity, but by creating systems that allow them to build something for themselves. It's time to stop pretending that giving a little here and there will fix everything. I want to use my position to make real changes that will last." Angela nodded slowly, considering his words. She had seen countless people make promises, only to backtrack when it got difficult. But there was something about Jason that made her think this time might be different. "It's going to take a lot of work," she warned him. "People will push back. People will resist. You can't change a system overnight, especially one as deeply entrenched as this one." "I know," Jason said, his voice firm. "But I'm ready to try. I've spent my whole life running a business. Now, I want to build something that actually helps people, not just makes more money." Angela studied him for a moment, her eyes softening. She had heard this before. She had heard these promises from men in power who couldn't be bothered to follow through. But for the first time, she felt like Jason might actually be sincere. "All right," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Let's see what you can do." Over the next few months, Jason's company underwent a complete transformation. The changes he implemented weren't just about creating opportunities for the marginalized. They were about ensuring that the voices of those who had been silenced for so long were finally heard. Angela, now working directly with Jason, helped design community programs, job training, and scholarships for people who had been excluded from the system. Jason made sure that all his employees, especially those in leadership positions, understood that true success meant lifting others up, not holding them down. The company started partnering with nonprofits, local businesses, and grassroots organizations to create a network of support for people who had been left out. Jason knew that this was just the beginning. Real change didn't happen overnight, but he was committed to seeing it through. And as for Angela, she felt a sense of pride in the work they were doing together. It wasn't about the money or the recognition. It was about knowing that, for the first time, the system was starting to shift. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Angela felt like there was hope. And Jason, sitting at his desk in his newly renovated office, knew that the work he was doing was the most important thing he had ever done. This wasn't just about building a successful business. It was about building a legacy of change. As time passed, Jason Fields and Angela Johnson's collaboration grew stronger, and the results were evident. The changes they had set in motion began to ripple out, slowly but surely. Jason's company, once known for its cutthroat business tactics, now had a new reputation, one that was rooted in integrity, fairness, and a commitment to social responsibility. Jason had stopped focusing solely on the bottom line and started to measure success by the impact they had on their communities. His leadership had shifted from controlling every aspect of his business to empowering others to take initiative and contribute to the greater good. But it was not always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when Jason wondered if they were doing enough. He'd face setbacks. Some of his old colleagues, who had once admired him for his ruthlessness, questioned his new approach. Some investors grew uneasy when the company's profits didn't increase as quickly as they had in the past. But Jason stood firm. He had realized that wealth wasn't the only form of success, and that legacy wasn't measured in numbers. It was measured in lives touched, in opportunities created. Angela, too, found herself transformed. The once cynical woman who had questioned Jason's sincerity now found herself in a leadership role, helping design programs that were actually making a difference. She had started to believe in the possibility of real change, and her role as a mentor to others was a constant reminder of the power of self-belief. Angela knew the work wasn't done. There would always be more to do. but the progress they had made felt like something worth fighting for. One afternoon, Jason and Angela sat in his office, reviewing the numbers for the latest round of initiatives. The room, filled with sunlight, had an air of quiet accomplishment. The programs they had launched were helping hundreds of people. Scholarships were being awarded to students who would have otherwise been overlooked. Job training and mentorship programs were empowering people to build careers they could be proud of. "I never thought it would be this fulfilling," Jason said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes scanning the reports on his desk. "This is the kind of work I wish I'd started sooner." Angela smiled softly, her arms crossed. "You've done a lot more than just make things right for yourself, Jason. You've made an impact. You're not the same person you were a year ago." Jason nodded, but there was still a sense of unease in his chest. "I know," he said quietly, "but I still feel like it's not enough. People have been left behind for so long. How can we make up for all those lost opportunities?" Angela's expression softened, and she stepped closer to his desk. "You're right. We can't fix everything overnight. But what you're doing now, this is the start. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. And that's what matters." Jason looked at her, grateful for her steady presence. He had learned so much from her: her resilience, her ability to stay focused on the bigger picture, and her unwavering belief in the power of kindness. As the days went by, the work continued. Jason's company became a leader in corporate social responsibility, showing other businesses that there was a different way to succeed. Angela was often asked to speak at events, where she shared her story of transformation and how she had seen firsthand what it meant to fight for what was right. One day, as they were both leaving the office, Jason paused, turning to Angela with a thoughtful expression. "You've helped me more than you know," he said. "I don't think I would have understood all of this without your push." Angela shook her head, her face softening. "You were always capable of this change, Jason. I just helped you see it. The real work was all you." They stood for a moment in silence, taking in the view of the city that stretched before them. New York, once a symbol of ruthless ambition, now felt like a place where change was possible. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He wasn't perfect. He still had a long way to go. But for the first time in a long time, he was proud of the work they had done, and he knew that no matter what happened next, he would never go back to the man he once was. Angela looked at him, sensing the quiet contentment in him, and smiled. "We're just getting started," she said. Jason smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Together, they had begun something that was bigger than any business deal, bigger than any fortune. They had started a movement that would create lasting change. And that, Jason realized, was the greatest success he could ever achieve. The change that Jason Fields had sparked within his company had begun to echo far beyond the walls of his office. Angela, once a woman who had only dreamed of making it, now stood as a beacon of hope and empowerment for countless others. Together, they had taken the first steps toward creating a new model of corporate responsibility, one that prioritized human connection over financial gain. However, the journey was not without its challenges. As Jason continued to lead the company in this new direction, he was met with resistance from some of his older colleagues, those who had thrived under the old way of doing business. They had grown accustomed to a world where profits were the ultimate measure of success, and the people who served them were little more than tools. Jason knew that changing the culture within his company would be difficult, but he was determined to push through. One morning, Jason and Angela were scheduled to meet with a group of potential investors. These investors were known for their keen ability to spot successful companies, but they were also known for their reluctance to back any business that wasn't focused on maximizing profit. Jason had prepared himself for the meeting, but he knew that Angela's presence would be crucial. She had seen firsthand the impact of their new approach, and her voice was the one that could truly make a difference. The meeting room was sleek, with polished wood floors and a long, dark conference table that gleamed under the bright overhead lights. The investors, well-dressed and stern-faced, sat across from Jason and Angela, sizing them up. Jason could feel the tension in the air as he began the presentation. "We've changed the way we operate," Jason began, his voice steady, but with a hint of determination. "Our focus is no longer solely on profit. It's about creating opportunities for people who have been left out for far too long. We're building a future where our success is measured not just by the financials, but by the impact we have on communities. The room was silent. Jason could feel the eyes of the investors on him, their skepticism palpable. He knew what they were thinking. How could this business survive if it wasn't solely focused on making money? But before anyone could speak, Angela stood up, her presence commanding attention. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I understand your hesitation," Angela said, her voice calm, but powerful. "But let me tell you something. This is about more than just numbers. This is about giving people the chance to rise. I was once a waitress. I spent years serving people like you. People who didn't see me for who I really was. But Jason saw something in me. He didn't just see a waitress. He saw someone with potential, with the ability to make a real difference. And that's what we're doing now. We're giving people the tools they need to build their own futures, just like I was given a chance to build mine." The investors exchanged looks, clearly taken aback by Angela's words. Jason watched as the room seemed to shift. He had always known that Angela's story was powerful, but hearing her speak with such conviction made him realize just how much had changed within him, too. The investors didn't speak for a few moments, and Jason could feel the tension building. Finally, one of the older investors, a man named Gregory, spoke up. "You're asking us to put our trust in a model that goes against everything we've built our careers on," he said. "But I have to admit, there's something about what you're saying that resonates. Maybe it's time to start thinking differently. Maybe it's time to put people first." Jason and Angela exchanged a glance. It was the breakthrough they had been hoping for. The meeting ended with a handshake, and for the first time, Jason felt confident that the shift in his company wasn't just a dream. It was becoming a reality. In the weeks that followed, the new approach began to gain traction. The investors, initially skeptical, came on board, and soon, Jason's company was recognized as a leader in corporate social responsibility. The programs they had launched began to bear fruit, with communities thriving and people finding new opportunities in areas where they had once been overlooked. Angela became a prominent figure in the company's initiatives, working closely with local leaders and businesses to expand their reach. She had never imagined that she would have this kind of influence, but now, she was helping to shape the future. Jason, meanwhile, continued to evolve as a leader. He had learned the importance of empathy, of truly listening to people and understanding their struggles. He knew that the work was far from over, but he also knew that, together, they had made a lasting impact. One evening, as Jason and Angela sat on the rooftop of the company's headquarters, looking out over the city, Jason turned to her and smiled. "I don't think I could have done this without you," he said quietly. Angela looked at him, a slight smile playing on her lips. "You could have," she replied, "but it would have taken a lot longer." Jason laughed, the weight of his past mistakes lifting off his shoulders. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Together, they had created something meaningful. And that, Jason realized, was what success truly looked like. Months passed, and Jason Fields felt the momentum of his transformation begin to truly take shape. The changes he had worked so hard for were beginning to ripple outward. His company had embraced a new direction, and as a result, it was no longer just another corporation chasing profits. It was a company that sought to build a legacy, one that empowered people and uplifted the communities it touched. Angela, by his side, had become an essential part of the vision they shared. She was no longer just the voice of reason. She was a key leader in the company's initiatives, helping shape the future alongside Jason. Together, they had created a framework that valued people first, profit second. Their mentorship programs were thriving, and local businesses were seeing growth as a result of their collaborations. Jason knew, though, that they were only scratching the surface. He had always been a person of action, but now, his actions were driven by something much deeper than ambition. They were driven by purpose. One day, while working late in his office, Jason received a call that would test just how committed he was to the changes he had made. It was from one of his major investors, a man named Gregory, who had been with Jason since the early days of the company. "Jason, I've been hearing some concerns." Gregory's voice was firm, yet there was an underlying tension. "Some of our shareholders aren't happy with the direction the company is going. They want to see the numbers improve, and they're questioning whether this shift towards social responsibility is really paying off. I think we need to rethink this approach, especially if you want to keep your investors happy." Jason sat back, the weight of the conversation sinking in. He had expected pushback, but hearing it from someone he had trusted was a different matter. He knew that Gregory was right. The shift had been slow, and the company's profits hadn't increased at the pace they were used to. But Jason had also seen something else, the people they were helping. The faces of those who had been given opportunities that would have been impossible before. That, to him, was worth more than any number on a balance sheet. I understand your concerns, Gregory, Jason said, his voice steady. But I won't compromise on the vision we've set. We're building something real here, not just another business. And while profits are important, they can't be the only thing we measure success by. Gregory paused on the other end of the line. So, you're willing to risk everything for this? For a change in direction that hasn't shown the kind of results we need? Jason leaned forward, looking out the window at the city lights below. I'm willing to risk everything. Because in the end, we're creating something that matters. We're giving people the chance to succeed, to build something for themselves, and to change the world in ways that go beyond dollars and cents. The silence on the other end of the phone was heavy. Finally, Gregory spoke, his voice softer this time. I hope you know what you're doing, Jason. I really do. But this won't be easy. You've got to be prepared for the fallout. Jason nodded to himself. He had known the path would be difficult, but he wasn't about to turn back now. I'm ready for it, he said, his conviction unwavering. I've seen the change we're making, and I know it's worth it. The next day, Jason and Angela met to discuss the situation. Angela listened carefully as Jason explained the conversation with Gregory. We knew this wouldn't be easy, she said after a long pause. But this is exactly why we're doing this. We're showing people that it's not about the money. It's about making a difference. And if we have to fight for that, then we'll fight. Jason smiled at her, grateful for her unwavering support. I don't think I could do this without you, he said, his voice full of appreciation. Angela shook her head. You've done this. I've just been here to help make sure it stays true. They both knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but they were prepared to face it together. As the months went by, Jason's company began to prove that success could be measured by more than just profits. The programs they had implemented were starting to show real results. The people they had mentored were growing in ways that were tangible, and businesses that had once been struggling were now thriving. Jason's vision was coming to life, and the company was slowly becoming a model for others to follow. Even Gregory, the skeptical investor, couldn't deny the positive changes. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jason stood on the balcony of his office, looking out over the city he had once sought to conquer. Now he was focused on building something far more important. As Angela joined him, standing quietly beside him, Jason felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had started a journey that had already changed lives, and they knew that they weren't done yet. Together, they had built something worth more than money. They had built a legacy. As the years passed, the transformation that Jason Fields and Angela Johnson had ignited continued to unfold, not only within their company, but across entire communities. What had once seemed like an impossible dream had become a powerful movement, one that was shifting the very fabric of the business world. Jason's company, now known for its commitment to social responsibility and empowerment, had become a beacon for others looking to make a real impact. The lessons they had learned along the way were not just academic. They were rooted in the real, lived experiences of people like Angela, whose life had been changed by the simple act of being seen. It had been a long road, and they still faced challenges. Change never came easily, and there were always people who resisted. Yet, with each passing day, their impact deepened. The mentorship programs flourished, and the scholarships they offered had helped hundreds of young people pursue their dreams. Local businesses that had partnered with Jason's company were thriving, and communities that had once been overlooked were now flourishing. Jason and Angela had started something far bigger than themselves. They had started a revolution in business, a revolution that put people first. One morning, as Jason walked through the office, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. The walls that once held only financial reports and profit margins were now adorned with photos of the communities they had helped. These were the faces of the people who had been given a chance to build something of their own, just as Angela had. He paused for a moment in front of one of the photos. It was of a young woman, a former waitress who had participated in their program. She had since gone on to start her own successful business, a coffee shop that now employed others in her neighborhood. The image was a reminder of why they had done this. For people like her. People who had the potential but had never had the opportunity. Angela, who had been working alongside Jason for years now, had become a mentor to countless others. She had helped guide individuals who were where she once was, showing them that they, too, had the power to change their circumstances. As the company expanded, Angela had taken on a larger role, managing many of the social initiatives that had become the heart of Jason's vision. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about legacy. And the legacy they were building was not one measured by stock prices, but by the lives they touched. Jason found himself thinking about the future, about what else needed to be done. There was so much more to accomplish. But for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace with the path he was on. The work was difficult, and there were still plenty of obstacles ahead. But he had Angela by his side, and together, they had built something that mattered. One evening, they sat together in Jason's office, looking out over the city. The lights of New York twinkled below them, a vast sea of opportunity. Angela, ever thoughtful, turned to Jason. "You know, we've made a lot of progress," she said, her voice steady. "But it's only the beginning. There are still so many people out there who need a chance." Jason nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know. And we'll keep going. We'll keep making it happen. For them." Angela smiled. For them. The two sat in silence for a while, knowing that the work ahead would never be easy. But they were both ready for it. They had come this far because they believed in something greater than themselves, something that transcended business. They believed in people, and that belief was what would carry them forward. Jason turned back to the window, his thoughts quiet but resolute. The city sprawled before him, its promise of endless possibilities within reach. He knew that the world was changing, and that he and Angela had played a part in that change. Together, they had begun a movement that had the power to reshape the future. And that, Jason thought, was something worth fighting for. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were on the right path. As he looked out at the horizon, Jason felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had found something more valuable than any fortune he had ever made. He had found purpose. And, with Angela by his side, there was no limit to what they could accomplish.